Planning my fresh cut flower and vegetable garden this year took me a lot longer than I thought it would, and I think that's because I didn't have a clear system when I started and I had a bit of a learning curve. So I want to share with you the final result I got to in planning our garden and the steps I took to get there so that your garden planning process could go a little bit smoother and quicker than mine did in the beginning. By the way, my name is Emma. I'm a mom of identical twins. I'm a Montessori trained teacher, and this year I'm starting our very first garden. We are going to be growing our garden at my in-laws because they have more space than we do, and we're just so excited. Behind me you see all of my seedlings that I started last week, and many of them have already sprouted, which is just so exciting to me. If you want to know how to start your own seeds and the supplies and tools you need to get started, I'll link that video up here in the cards because I went through everything that I used to get started. I'm no professional gardener, but I am doing my research, diving into all things gardening. Without further ado, let's get into planning out this year's garden. So to be honest, the first part of planning our garden was learning about gardening. And I suppose if you're an experienced gardener, then maybe this step isn't necessary for you. But for me, I felt like there was a lot of things I just needed to learn to get started, especially wanting to start our plants from seed. And so I have a wonderful resource that I want to share with you. My sister, she is a flower farmer, and they've been farming flowers for many years now and has learned a ton along the way. And she created this resource. It's a fresh cut flower primer, and it walks you through all things about what kinds of fresh flowers you could grow in your garden. But a lot of this will also be relevant if you plan to grow vegetables. And we'll talk about spacing your plants, succession planting, direct sowing, all of those things that you need to know to get started growing a garden, but also specifically growing fresh cut flowers. And maybe you didn't even realize that you could grow fresh cut flowers, but rest assured, she will probably convince you that you want to grow a fresh cut flower garden. I know for me, just looking through this resource, it's beautiful and inspiring to see the kinds of beauty that we can create just with these small, tiny little seeds. And so I'm going to link that in the description box below. She just recently started a blog. It's still in those kind of grassroots stages, so this resource she has available for you. But if you're interested in fresh cut flowers, be sure to follow along with things that will be coming in the future from her platform. This resource really just gave me the confidence I needed to get started. It's a little daunting doing something when you haven't done it before. Part of a successful gardening and planting year, I think, starts with having a really solid, clear plan. Maybe that's more my personality, or maybe that is true. Each plant is so different, and there's a lot of things to know about each plant in terms of when it can go in, how close it can be planted to other crops, and that needs some careful planning to really optimize the space that you have and the full growing season. So here is how I kind of thought through our garden this year. So the first thing I had to do was think about the space that we had available. So like I said, we are growing our garden at our in-laws, and then I will do some smaller things in pots here at our house. We live in an association, and so we can't have a garden in our yard. And so we are utilizing this other space we have available to us, and we have quite a lot of space. And so our garden this year is going to be 30 feet long by 26 feet wide, and we're going to fence in this area. So stay tuned for all of that project that's going to be upcoming in the next few weeks. My husband and I were just planning out all of the materials and supplies that we need to tackle that project. Within that garden space, we are going to have 4 rows that are 4 feet wide, and they're going to be 26 feet long. And then we will have a 2-foot wide border around every bed. And so that's the size that we have to work with, which is a pretty large garden to get started in. So once we kind of knew how much space we had to work with, then we had to figure out what we wanted to grow. And, I'm growing a lot of the basics. We're going to be growing tomatoes and peppers and jalapenos. I'm going to try kind of a little bit of everything. So I'd also like to try cucumbers and onions and potatoes, squash, cabbage, carrots. We're going to do some lettuces and herbs. And then I'm going to devote a whole bed to fresh cut flowers. And then I'm going to do another bed with pumpkins and squash. And so I think that's going to give us a really good variety. Some of them I'm not going to plant like a ton of, and that will just give us some more information moving into future gardening seasons of what does well in our area, what had a really good yield, and maybe things that didn't do so well. So once I knew what we wanted to grow, then I went and I ordered seeds. I ordered our seeds online from Johnny's, and I ordered the seeds that I didn't have available to me because my sister does a lot of gardening and she has ordered a lot of seeds in bulk. She was willing to share her seeds with me, and that was a really fun process to see the way that she organized her seeds. And I have these huge aspirations that one day I will be able to, have that many seeds available and organize them all and just have this plethora of gardening experience. But we all start somewhere. And so I used a lot of what she had, which was great, and then purchased things that she didn't have enough of a supply for. There are a lot of other places that you can get your seeds from. You'll be able to find your seeds at any garden center. Even today I saw some at Walmart, and I picked up a few things that I needed there. But if you're looking for maybe some higher quality, non-GMO heirloom seeds, there's some great online catalogs and websites that you can get those seeds from. And I'll put all of those in the description box below. Once we figured out like how much space we had, what we wanted to grow, we really had to think through what type of gardening we were going to do. If we were going to do raised garden beds, if we were just going to, we could have gone on a much smaller scale and planted things in pots. If we were going to till the garden. And we ultimately decided on doing a no-dig or a no-till method of a garden this year. And primarily we did this because, one, this is what my sister and her husband had been doing for many years, had a lot of success. But also in researching this, so I've been following Charles Dowding on YouTube and, looking into a lot of his videos of this method, this no-dig method. I'll link his channel in the description box. But essentially, you will lay down cardboard on top of either the existing weeds or grass that's there. And then you'll come in and bring in compost and mulch for the pathways, and you will build garden beds on top of the existing soil. And this is really a way to keep the integrity of the soil that you have there without disturbing that good natural microbiome that exists in soil. And so by just bringing in compost and not disturbing that soil by tilling or digging it up, you are leaving a lot of the value and the integrity of that soil there. I feel like we still have a lot to learn about that method, but it seems pretty straightforward. And so we're excited to get started with that method. We just really think this is a good approach to take. So if you're interested in it, make sure to check him out. A lot of the other gardening accounts and people that I follow, this is a pretty common and up and coming form of gardening, and I'm excited to start doing it as well. So once we kind of nailed down all those just logistics, then it came time to planning out and mapping out the garden. I kind of looked at this large picture and then brought it into each bed. And so we looked at our whole garden as a whole, and like I said, we're having those 4 beds. So we are going to have one whole bed devoted to tomatoes and peppers. And then when I went further into doing this, I did this multiple ways, but for my brain, I really liked having all of the information I needed at a quick glance on one piece. I drew out what this garden bed would look like, and then I drew out the spacing of the plants. And then I also wrote out which plants on the map are which variety. And so we decided to grow 3 different tomato varieties. We're going to do a paste tomato, a cherry tomato, and a slicing tomato. And so we're going to do the most paste tomatoes so that we can and preserve those for the off season. And then we still did some of the others. We're also doing bell peppers and jalapenos for the other variety of peppers. And so on the side, I wrote all those varieties, and then I wrote how many plants I will have room for in the garden. And then I doubled that for the plants that I need to start from seed. And that surprised me, but my sister was saying you'll be surprised at how many plants die before you get them in. Either they don't germinate or something affects them, or I even suppose if once we transplant them, if they get shocked and then they don't survive then, if I have a few extras, that's a really good backup. So that's our plan. And so this is just really helpful when it's time to start certain seeds to reference this. I put together a calendar of all of when I need to start the seeds a little bit later, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So my second garden bed is going to be the fresh cut flowers. And this is where my sister's resource was super helpful because she had spacing guides that were specific to flowers. And then a lot of them helped me think through how I would space my vegetables as well. Kind of wanted to just do like a little bit of everything and just see what these plants are like. I mean, I feel like I'm just so excited to see something grow from a tiny little seed to be either a beautiful fruit or vegetable or flower in just a couple of months. And so we're kind of doing a variety of a lot of them. Similar, I wrote out how much space I had for each plant. And then I wrote out how many I needed to start indoors. Then I also wrote out, and this was a tip I got from my sister's resource, was knowing how tall the mature plant gets. And knowing the height of the plant is going to help you arrange those plants in the garden. She also mentioned running your rows, if you have the option of where you put this, running them north to south, because then the plants aren't going to cast a shadow on one another, which will just be better for kind of even growing an optimal sun exposure. So that's what we're doing. We're running our beds north to south, and then I took down the height of each plant so that I could kind of think through what order I should put them in. Another thing to consider is the timing you put things into the ground. So you have some plants that are frost hardy and some that are not. And so by knowing that information, that'll also help when you are planting in the garden, because you'll be doing things in a similar time. And so it will help just make that spacing easier. The other piece of information I wrote related to the flowers was, it's called pinching. So at a certain point, you'd want to cut the top of the plant down so that it sends a message to the plant to keep growing more stems rather than just continuing to get taller. And this is going to optimize the number of blooms that you get from that plant. And so on these flower packets, it specifies at what height you would pinch the plant. And I made that note as well because, for example, zinnias, you pinch the plant at 8 to 12 inches, but the plant, if allowed to grow to like its full height and maturity, would get to 48 to 54 inches. And that's a big difference. And so knowing when I pinch it is going to help me know where to place it in the garden. And I think I did a good job with this. I guess we will just find out as things grow. But it was helpful for me to just have all of this information on one page so that when I'm starting seeds, I can just glance and see how many seeds do I want, or how many of this plant do I want in the garden, and then how many am I going to start indoors if it needed to be started indoors. My third garden bed, this is going to be some of my cooler weather crops. I'm going to do beans, onions, carrots, cucumber, and cabbage. I wasn't as specific on all of the spacing because when you're directly sowing that, I'll just make sure I have an abundance of seeds. And the beans, actually, I'm going to be successively planting them every couple of weeks to continue to get a yield throughout the growing season. And some of these, like the onions and the carrots, can go into the ground. They're a little bit more frost hardy, and so those can go into the ground a little bit earlier. And so I'm going to show you how I notated all of those timings of when I plant it later in my garden plan. The last bed that we are doing is going to be for pumpkins and squashes. And maybe we'll start some of them indoors if I have space still. Otherwise, I might just plant them directly into the ground. We've had a pretty mild winter, so I'm anticipating that we maybe will be able to get things out even sooner than we have in the past, but we will just see. So I'm going to do this on this fourth bed just because we're going to have the fencing, which will allow it to trellis, and it will just give it a little bit more space because I know these plants tend to roam a lot and can kind of take over a garden if they are allowed to. So I made two kinds of schedules for the garden plan. So the first was a sowing schedule indoors. How I got started to figure out this calendar was knowing our average last frost date. For where I live in Minnesota, that's May 1st. On certain plants, you can sow them indoors. And the reason you do that is because potentially the plant would take too long to get to maturity and bear fruit before the next frost in the fall. And so by starting them, 6 to 8 weeks early or 3 to 4 weeks early, you are kind of giving it a head start on that growing season, and even lengthening your growing season for different things. And then there's a lot that you don't need to start in advance, and you can plant it directly into the ground, and that will be great. So I mapped out each week and how many weeks it was before the frost, and then I plugged in all of the plants that needed to be planted at that time in that week, so that on a weekly basis I can look and see what plants I need to get started. The next portion of my calendar that I did was the transplanting or the direct sowing schedule. And so this is more my outdoor schedule. And I just organized this by crop variety. So I did all of my herbs and all of my vegetables and all of the flowers, just so that when I look at it, it's a little bit more organized. You could organize it however you'd like. To figure out when to plant certain things, I found this resource. It's just the online almanac, and you can plug in your zip code, and then it populates a calendar of when you should start certain plants indoors based on your average last frost where you live. So when you should plant them indoors, if that's relevant, when you can transplant them, or when you could directly sow them in the ground, and then the last possible day to grow them. And that's important because, for example, beans and sunflowers, those are ones that I'm going to be sowing directly in the ground, and I might be planting them multiple times throughout the summer. But there's a certain date where I can't plant them anymore because they won't have enough time to grow and produce their fruit or their harvest by the next frost date. And so it's helpful to notate that date as well, so that you don't waste seeds or planting things that aren't going to have enough time to mature. So that resource gave me a range of dates of when I can plant things into the ground or transplant them. When I was looking up all of the flowers, most of them just say after the risk of a frost, then you can plant them into the ground. So a lot of it tends to be the end of May, but you have a range of dates, so it doesn't have to be on one specific day. What I'm hearing is you're going to want to just really watch the weather too, and make sure there's no storms coming or things like that, so that the transplanting can be as easy and seamless as possible. And so I just kind of wrote down those ranges to help me out in terms of really just even planning our life of when do we need to plan an evening or a weekend to go and plant certain crops into the garden. And then there's certain plants that you can put into the ground earlier, like onions and carrots and cabbage and lettuces and potatoes. I put a little asterisk by them to remind myself that that's going to be sooner than all of the other things. Then as I was going through my planning, I also just made notes of things I still needed to buy, like my onion sets and my potato seeds and those kinds of things, so that I just had any of those gardening notes here available to me for the rest of the season. The last part of our gardening process was to figure out how much compost and wood chips we needed to bring in to make our beds this year. And so we'll be sourcing those things and getting things delivered to my in-laws' property so that we can build and make those beds. All right, you guys, that's all I have for you. Thanks for watching today's video. If you're looking for more of our gardening journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along. If you're interested in more Montessori-inspired homemaking motherhood content, also hit that subscribe button. That's kind of where the bulk of my content is, but we're throwing in the garden because that's what we're doing this year. So I'm so glad you're here, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day. Bye.